Her name is Holly Bobo. She's 20 years old, a nursing student, and it's a little after 7:40 on the morning of April 13th, 2011, in Darden, Tennessee. Minutes ago, she was inside the house getting ready for class. Now she's on her knees in the carport, and a man dressed head to toe in camo is standing over her. Inside, the phone rings. It's their mother. Clint mentions, almost casually, that Holly's outside arguing with Drew. His mother's voice changes. "That's not Drew. Get a gun. Shoot him." Clint runs outside. The yard is empty. Holly's gone. Into the tree line behind her own home, and on the concrete where she'd been kneeling, there's blood. He calls 911. Deputies race to the scene. Dogs track her scent into the woods and lose it. Her cell phone pings one tower, then another, moving away from home, toward the interstate. And then it goes dark for good. Holly Bobo was never seen alive again. What follows is the largest, most expensive manhunt in Tennessee history. 3.5 years of searching. A skull found under a bucket in the woods. A trial. A conviction. A killer, supposedly, behind bars for life. And then, years later, the one man whose testimony sent him there looks into a camera from prison and says a single thing that threatens to unravel everything. "I made it all up." So what really happened in those 12 minutes? Who walked Holly Bobo into those woods, and is the right man paying for it? That's what we're going to work through tonight. This is Crime Watch Cold Case. Before we begin, a warning. This is a real case, with a real victim and a real family who lived through it. Some of the details are disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. If you want to see this case through to the end with us, subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's get into it. To understand what happened to Holly Bobo, you have to understand where it happened. Darden, Tennessee. Blink and you'd miss it. An unincorporated speck of Decatur County, tucked along the Tennessee River, about an hour west of Nashville. A few hundred people, a lot of farmland, and thick woods pressing in on every side. This is West Tennessee, Bible Belt country. The kind of place where families work the same land their grandparents worked, where church on Sunday isn't a question, and where a man walking out of the tree line at dawn in full camouflage isn't a threat. It's just deer season, or turkey season. It's normal. Out here, people leave their doors unlocked. They wave at cars they don't recognize. Everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows everybody's business, and that's not a bad thing. It's the whole point. In a place like Darden, your neighbors are your security system, and in 2011, that mattered, because there wasn't much else. This is before a camera hung over every gas pump and doorbell. Out in the county, surveillance was thin to none. Cell phones could be traced, but only roughly. A ping to a tower miles wide, not a dot on a map. DNA testing took weeks, sometimes longer. If someone wanted to take a person and disappear, rural Tennessee in 2011 was about the worst place in America to try and stop them. Nobody in Darden was thinking about any of that. Why would they? Nothing happened here. Holly Lynn Bobo was born on October 12, 1990, the younger of Dana and Karen Bobo's 2 kids. Her father ran an excavating business, a man who made his living moving earth with his hands. Her mother, Karen, taught at the local elementary school. Between them, they raised Holly and her older brother Clint in a warm, tight, deeply Christian home at the edge of those woods. At 20, Holly was chasing a dream bigger than a town this size usually holds on to. She was studying nursing at the University of Tennessee at Martin, taking classes at the Parsons campus just up the road. She wanted to take care of people, to heal them. The people who knew her describe her the same way, over and over. Shy, quiet, but underneath that, relentless. Holly was the kind of student who'd put her head down and outwork everyone in the room. She knew exactly what she wanted, and she was going after it, one early morning at a time. She had a serious boyfriend, too. Drew Scott. The two of them were building a future together. Drew had already given her a promise ring, and the people around them figured a real engagement wasn't far off. He hunted the family's land, knew the woods, was welcome at the Bobo house. He was exactly the kind of young man a family hopes their daughter brings home. And then there was Clint, 5 years older, still in college himself, working toward a degree to become a social worker. Holly and Clint were close in that particular way. Siblings are when they're raised right. She was the driven little sister. He was the big brother who'd have done anything for her. They lived under the same roof. He was there almost every morning. Remember that. He was there. The Bobos were, by every account, one of the good families. Known. Liked. The kind of people who showed up for their neighbors and expected nothing back. Holly's own cousin, Whitney Duncan, was even making a name for herself as a country singer up in Nashville. A little brush with the wider world. But the Bobos stayed exactly who they'd always been. Small town, grounded, safe. That was the word for their life. Safe. They had no reason to think otherwise. In a community like theirs, the danger was supposed to come from somewhere else. An outsider, a stranger passing through. Not from anyone who belonged. Not from anyone who knew the roads. But later, after everything, Holly's father would say something that still lands like a stone in your chest. He said he had a feeling it might have been somebody close, somebody who knew their routine, who knew when Karen left for work, when he left, when Holly left for school, somebody who was watching. And on the morning of April 13th, 2011, that routine was about to play out exactly like it always did. Holly, up before dawn, studying at the kitchen table for a nursing exam she would never take. It was the last ordinary morning the Bobo family would ever have. 4:30 in the morning. Holly's alarm goes off in the dark. Nobody else is up yet. She has a nursing exam later that day, and Holly is not the type to wing it. So she pads into the kitchen, sits down at the table with her notes, and studies. On a Wednesday, before the sun is even up. Her mother, Karen, gets up a little after. She moves through the kitchen the way she does every school morning. Grabs Holly a muffin, packs her a lunch. The small, automatic rituals of a mom sending her kid out the door. Then she kisses her daughter goodbye, tells her she loves her, and leaves to go teach at the elementary school. The house goes quiet again. Just Holly and her brother Clint, still asleep down the hall. Around 7:30, Holly's phone rings. It's Drew, her boyfriend, calling from the woods. He's out on her grandmother's property, turkey hunting, the way he often does. It's a normal call, a short one, just checking in before her day gets going. 12 minutes later, at 7:42, Holly makes a call of her own. It's the last thing she will ever do on that phone. After 7:42, every call, every text, every message that comes in for Holly Bobo goes unanswered, forever. And somewhere in the next few minutes, the family dogs lose their minds. Not the lazy barking at a squirrel or a passing truck. This is frantic, aggressive, the kind of barking that means something is wrong. And it's that sound, not an alarm, not a scream, just the dogs going wild, that drags Clint Bobo up out of sleep. He goes to the window, still half asleep, and looks out toward the carport. And there's Holly. She's down on the ground, kneeling, and standing over her is a man, dressed head to toe in camouflage. They're talking, and it looks tense. Holly seems upset. The man is doing most of the talking. Clint can't hear much through the glass, but he catches a couple of words from his sister. No, why? And here is the moment that will haunt this family for the rest of their lives. Because Clint looks at that scene, a man in camo, at dawn, in deer and turkey country, standing with his sister, and his mind reaches for the most ordinary explanation there is. That's Drew. That's her boyfriend. They're having some kind of argument. It's not his business. so he doesn't go outside. Not yet. Then the phone rings in the house. It's his mother. And when Clint mentions, almost in passing, that Holly is out in the yard arguing with Drew, Karen's whole world tips over, because she knows something Clint doesn't. That's not Drew. Get a gun, she tells him. Shoot him. Clint grabs a loaded pistol and runs out the door. But by the time his feet hit the carport, it's already over. Holly is gone, walked into the dense woods behind her own home, beside a stranger, either going willingly or in a way that made fighting back impossible. And there, on the concrete where his sister had just been kneeling, Clint sees it. Blood. Holly's blood. He dials 911. His mother is calling too, hysterical. From her school across the county, a friend already speeding her toward home. The calls come in frantic and scattered, from 2 different places, trying to describe something almost impossible to put into words. And in the gap between the first bark of those dogs and the moment anyone truly understood what was happening, the most precious minutes of all simply bled away. When deputies finally reach the Bobo home, they do everything right, and it doesn't matter. They bring in K9 units to track Holly's scent into the trees. The dogs pick it up and then lose it, swallowed by the thick forest that wraps around the property on every side. The one thread they have left is technology. Holly's phone is still active, still reaching out to cell towers, and those pings tell a chilling story. Her phone is moving, away from the house, away from safety, north, toward Interstate 40, toward the wide-open highways where a person can be driven anywhere and disappear. And then the phone goes dark. By that afternoon, what began as one frightened brother's 911 call has become something no one in Decatur County was ready for. A young woman taken in broad daylight from her own front yard in a town where that sort of thing simply does not happen. This wasn't a missing person case anymore. It was a manhunt, and it was about to become the largest one the state of Tennessee had ever seen. By the next morning, Darden did the only thing a place like Darden knows how to do. It showed up. Hundreds of volunteers poured in, from Decatur County and well beyond it, from 5 counties and more. Ordinary people walking shoulder to shoulder through fields and thickets and creek bottoms, calling Holly's name until their voices gave out. Farmers on 4-wheelers, neighbors on horseback, helicopters overhead, search teams on the ground, dogs working the tree lines. If you could walk a fence row, you searched. The reward money climbed fast, starting at $25,000 and swelling into the hundreds of thousands. In the end, more than $450,000 was raised by a community and a country that just wanted an answer, because this wasn't a local story for long. A young nursing student, taken in daylight from her own home, it exploded across the national news. Nancy Grace covered it night after night. America's Most Wanted put Holly's face in front of the entire country. For a while there, everyone in America knew her name. The searchers kept finding pieces of that morning. Her belongings, turning up in the woods and along the roads near her home in the days after she vanished. Small, gut-wrenching proof that she had been right there. And each discovery did the same cruel thing. It lifted the family's hope and crushed it in the very same breath. Signs of Holly everywhere. Holly herself nowhere. And then nothing. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The huge search parties shrank. The news trucks packed up and drove home. Person after person was brought in, questioned, cleared. Every promising lead curled up and died in a dead end. There were false alarms too, and they were merciless. In 2013, investigators announced they'd found a purse they believed belonged to Holly. Her mother was brought in to look at it. It wasn't hers. More waiting for that. But Dana and Karen Bobo refused to let their daughter fade into an old headline. They organized their own searches. They kept her face on posters and her name in reporters' mouths. They kept the pressure on law enforcement, month after month, year after year. Parents who simply would not accept that Holly was gone. Her disappearance ended up changing Tennessee law. It exposed a gap. The state's emergency alert systems were built around missing children, and Holly, at 20, had slipped right through it. Lawmakers passed what became known as the Holly Bobo Act, widening those urgent alerts to cover young adults, so that the next family might get the head start that hers never had. Years later, a stretch of Highway 641 through Decatur County would be given her name, so that anyone driving through would remember her. But in 2011 and 2012 and 2013, there was still no Holly. And slowly, unbearably, the case that everyone once believed would end in a rescue began to feel like something colder, a case that might never be solved at all. Then came September 7th, 2014. A man named Larry Stone is out in the woods of northern Decatur County with his cousin, doing what folks out there do, hunting ginseng, the wild root that grows in the Tennessee forest. It's an ordinary afternoon, quiet work. Then Stone notices something on the ground that doesn't belong. At a glance, it looks like an overturned bucket sitting there in the leaves. He reaches down and turns it over. It's a human skull. Stone breaks down right where he's standing. He turns to his cousin and says the words that stay with everyone who's ever heard them. Please tell me that's one of those fake ones they use in school. Please tell me it's not real. But deep down, he already knew. Investigators moved in and found more. Partial remains scattered across the forest floor, and nearby, a wallet. Inside it, a driver's license. Holly's. Testing confirmed within a day what everyone's heart had already understood. After 3.5 years, the search for Holly Bobo was over. She was found less than 10 miles from home, in the woods just off Interstate 40, the same direction her phone had been traveling that final morning before it went silent. And her remains told investigators one more terrible thing. This was not a young woman who had simply wandered off and gotten lost in the trees. There was a gunshot wound to the back of her head. Holly Bobo had been murdered. For Dana and Karen, some fragile part of them had spent 3.5 years holding on to the impossible, that their daughter might still be out there somewhere, alive, on her way home. Now Holly was coming home, just not the way they had prayed for. The county sheriff called the discovery divine intervention, the woods finally giving her back. But finding Holly only answered one question. It opened a much larger one. Who did this to her? And would anyone ever be made to answer for it? Finding Holly's body didn't crack this case open. In a strange way, the case had already started cracking months before. To understand how, you have to understand the world these men lived in. Not the church-going, door-unlocked Decatur County the Bobos knew, but a shadow version of it, running right underneath. A world of methamphetamine and morphine, of small-time dealers and hard living, of men who drifted in and out of jail, and in and out of each other's lives. Over the course of the investigation, at least 6 men would be pulled into this case in one way or another. The first real break came in an interrogation room. In early 2014, Zach Adams' younger brother, John Dylan Adams, was brought in and questioned. Dylan was not, by any account, a sophisticated man. His family has long described him as intellectually disabled, the kind of person who could be led, who might give the people in the room whatever answer would make them stop. And over a long interrogation, Dylan gave them one. He said he'd seen Holly at his brother Zach's house after she was taken, and he named names, his brother Zach, a man named Jason Autry, and another named Shane Austin. But here's the problem, and it's a problem that hangs over this entire case. Dylan Adams later took it all back. His family said he'd been worn down and fed the story. and even the prosecution didn't fully trust it. When the trial finally came, they chose not to put Dylan on the stand at all, because parts of his account simply didn't line up with the rest of the evidence. Still, it was enough to light the fuse. Shane Austin was granted immunity to talk. Then prosecutors decided he wasn't being truthful and revoked it. Austin was never formally indicted for Holly's murder, but he lived under the cloud of it. And in February 2015, in Florida, Shane Austin took his own life. Whatever he knew, he took with him. That left 3 men to face charges for the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Holly Bobo: Zach Adams, Jason Autry, and Dylan Adams. Only one of them would ever go to trial: Zach Adams. In September 2017, more than 6 years after Holly vanished, he finally stood before a jury in Savannah, Tennessee, facing the death penalty. The story the prosecution told was almost too strange to believe. They argued the motive had nothing to do with Holly at all, not at first. According to the state, Adams and the others came to the Bobo property that morning, out of that drug world. Prosecutors said Adams later claimed he'd gone there to teach Holly's brother Clint how to cook meth. When Holly stepped outside, the plan changed in an instant, and she was taken. What the state said happened next was horrific: that Holly was driven away and raped, and that in the end, she was killed and her body carried toward the Tennessee River. But almost every vivid detail of that final sequence came from a single source, not from forensics, not from any confession by Adams himself, from one man on the witness stand: Jason Autry. So who was Jason Autry? By his own admission, a career criminal, a longtime friend of Zach Adams, a man who'd been locked up before, who battled addiction to meth and morphine, and who, crucially, was himself charged in Holly's death. Staring down the possibility of dying behind bars, Autry cut a deal. He would testify against his friend in exchange for leniency, and testify he did. Autry gave the jury exactly what a case like this was missing: a narrator, calm, detailed, specific. He described the body wrapped in a blanket, the drive to the river, and told jurors that when the men went to move her, Holly was somehow still alive, and that it was Zach Adams who shot her. It was chilling testimony, and the trial judge would later call it credible. But the defense went straight at the empty space underneath it. Because when you stripped away Autry's words, what was actually there? No DNA linking Zach Adams to Holly, no fingerprints, no physical forensic evidence tying him to her, or to the place her remains were found. None. What the state had was Autry's story, a handful of jailhouse witnesses who claimed Adams had bragged or made disturbing comments. One ex-girlfriend testified he'd threatened to tie her up, just like he did Holly Bobo, and a web of circumstance. And the defense pushed further. They argued Autry's timeline didn't even hold together, that to do everything he described, in the window he described it, the men would have had to drive at near impossible speeds down winding country back roads. They pointed out something else too. Autry had been given access to the case discovery, the evidence files, before he ever took the stand. Which meant, the defense argued, he had everything he needed to build a story that fit. Then, the defense turned the spotlight somewhere else entirely. They called a former TBI agent named Terry Dicus, the original lead investigator on the Holly Bobo case. And Dicus told the jury that he had cleared Zach Adams early on, and that his suspicion had always pointed toward a different man, a local, previously convicted sex offender named Terry Britt, who Dicus believed matched the description of the man in the camouflage. But this is where honesty matters, because that theory never came close to a conviction. Dicus had been removed from the investigation. His superiors said he'd developed tunnel vision. Terry Britt himself was called to the stand and asked directly whether he had anything to do with abducting, raping, or killing Holly Bobo. His answer was flat: No, I did not. Prosecutors said the evidence against Britt simply wasn't there. He was investigated. He was never charged. And to this day, in this case, he stands accused of nothing. So the jury was left with a hard question. Did the state's messy, witness-driven case actually prove that Zach Adams did this? Or did it just prove that someone needed to pay for what happened to Holly Bobo? On September 22, 2017, they gave their answer. Guilty, on all counts, first-degree murder, especially aggravated kidnapping, aggravated rape. Adams had been facing execution, but just before the penalty phase could begin, his team struck a deal. Adams would spend the rest of his life in prison, no chance of parole, plus 50 years, and the death penalty would come off the table. The other men resolved their cases without trials. Dylan Adams entered what's called an Alford plea in January 2018, accepting a 35-year sentence while still insisting he was innocent. And Jason Autry, the star witness, the man whose words had done more than anything else to convict his friend, pleaded to lesser charges, was praised by the judge, served roughly 8 years, and walked out of prison in 2020. For the Bobo family, it looked, at last, like the end. 6 years of searching and grief and courtrooms, and finally, a verdict. Justice, it seemed, had been done. It would hold for about 7 years. And then, Jason Autry opened his mouth again. In late 2023, inside a prison, Jason Autry sat down across from a forensic neuropsychologist. And he said something that would tear the wound in this case wide open. He said he made it all up. Every detail. The blanket, the truck, the river, the shot under the bridge. According to Autry, none of it was something he witnessed. It was something he built. He said he'd taken a real day from his own life and, in his words, added Holly to it. He claimed he'd used the phone records and the case files handed to him in discovery to construct a story detailed enough, specific enough, to be believed. And he said he did it for one reason, because his lawyer had told him he was almost certainly going to be convicted, and this was his way out from under a possible death sentence. The star witness, the man whose calm, vivid testimony had done more than anything else to send Zach Adams to prison for the rest of his life, now saying, on camera, that he had invented it to save himself. In 2024, that video became public, and a case everyone thought was closed cracked back open. Zach Adams, who had always maintained his innocence, filed for a new trial. And what followed was not a quick hearing. It stretched across many months, through 9 days of testimony, 25 witnesses, 156 exhibits. The whole case pulled apart and examined again. But the recantation ran into a wall almost immediately. The judge ruled that Autry's videotaped confession couldn't be used as evidence because he hadn't made it under oath. It was an interview, not testimony. And when Autry was actually brought into the post-conviction fight, where he would have been under oath, he didn't repeat any of it. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and said nothing at all. So the man at the center of everything stayed silent. Adams, though, did something he'd never done before. At his original trial, he had not testified. This time, he took the stand himself and denied it all. Denied kidnapping, raping, or killing Holly Bobo, and pointed to an alibi he said had never been fully investigated. A bank ATM in Parsons, and footage of a truck that morning he insisted would clear him. His own former trial attorney testified too, admitting she'd been overwhelmed and outmatched during the original case. Then, on July 17, 2026, after all of it, the ruling came down. Judge Brent Bradbury denied Zach Adams a new trial. In a 97-page decision, he rejected every claim. The recantation, the argument that Adams' lawyers had failed him, and the alternative suspect theory, which the judge found simply wasn't supported. Adams' conviction and his life sentence would stand. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation said it was pleased with the decision, that it affirmed the jury's verdict as just, and the Bobo family, through a spokesperson, said the ruling couldn't bring Holly back or ease their loss, but that knowing the verdict had held gave them some measure of peace. So where does that leave us? It's worth being clear and honest here, because it's easy to sensationalize this, and Holly deserves better than that. As of now, the courts have looked hard at Jason Autry's recantation, and they have rejected it. Zach Adams remains convicted. He can still appeal, so this may not be the last word the legal system has on it. But at every turn so far, the trial, the appeals, and now a grueling post-conviction hearing, the verdict has been upheld. And still, this case leaves a certain unease. A conviction built largely on the word of a man who has since said, in two completely different directions, both that Adams did it and that he didn't. A career criminal who, whichever version you believe, admits he lied under oath at least once. That's the hard, uncomfortable heart of the Holly Bobo case, and it's why people are still arguing about it today. But in the end, this was never really a story about Jason Autry, or Zach Adams, or the men who spent years fighting over what did or didn't happen in those woods. It's a story about Holly, a 20-year-old who got up before dawn to study, who wanted to spend her life healing people, who had a family that loved her, and a future she was working toward, one early morning at a time. A young woman whose parents refused to let her be forgotten, who searched and fought and sat through every painful day of it for more than a decade. Her name is on a Tennessee law now, one that helps other families get the head start hers never got. Her name is on a stretch of highway through the county she called home, and her name is the one that should stay with you when everything else fades. Holly Lynn Bobo, remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived. Thank you for watching Crime Watch Cold Case. If Holly's story moved you, take a moment to subscribe, so these cases, and the people at the center of them, aren't forgotten.